Boundaries. We all have our boundaries, isn't it? There are physical boundaries like national boundaries. You need visas to go from one country to another. There are cultural boundaries, language boundaries. A wise man would often say that while it's difficult to eliminate the physical boundaries, one should always strive to expand the intellectual boundary. Why I'm showing this particular picture right here is to showcase that even something as magnanimous as sunlight has its boundary. There is a boundary of day and night as is captured perfectly in this image by NASA. Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about SCCM site boundaries, and I'm going full pro on this one. As SCCM would define, or Microsoft documentation would define, boundaries in Config Manager define network locations to your intranet. Purely in context of Config Manager, I would like to relate this not as a limitation but as accessibility to the intranet locations, or the scope that can be managed through Config Manager. Now, there are multiple types of site boundaries. There are IP subnet based boundaries, the Active Directory site name boundaries, IPv6 prefix boundary, which is very rarely used because IPv6 itself is rarely used, IP address range, and VPN based boundaries. So let's quickly go over to our Config Manager environment and see what kind of boundaries exist. Alright, so if we go under Administration tab and then we go under Hierarchy Configuration, we see something called as boundaries and boundary groups. Now, by default, if we were to push a package or a policy or a deployment to a client, there are a good chance that it would not reach, because the way it's currently configured, the config manager would not know how to reach that particular client, where it is sitting, or how to deliver the package or the policy. And that's why we create boundaries. Now, boundary group is basically a collection of boundaries, and boundary group is where we attach our site servers to. So within one boundary group, we can have several boundaries and several different types of boundaries. What are those types of boundaries? We will see. So if we click on create boundary, right, we're going to give it a name. Let's say we are giving it a name PDC, which is our primary data center, and let's call it AD site. Okay, and I want to create an Active Directory site based boundary. Now in my lab, if we go to our Active Directory, if we go under sites and services, we will see that in my current lab I have configured just a single site which is called PDC. Now currently all the clients within this site would authenticate using this domain controller, which happens to be the only domain controller right now. And so that is why if I quickly check the type as Active Directory site and click on browse, that should be the only site that should come by default, and there it is. Right, currently I do not have a boundary group, so I cannot add it anywhere. I'll just click on OK. Right, so that's my first boundary created, and the type of this boundary is Active Directory site. Now I can also create an IP range based boundary. If I select IP address range, I can create an IP range based boundary. Let me take you quickly to the sites and services again. So if you look at the properties of this, I'm sorry, not this one. If you see the properties of this site, so any address from 192.168.189.0 till 255 will be a member of this Active Directory site, and that's why this site-based boundary would recognize it. Now, if I were to go and if I were to create a IP range based boundary, I would say 192.168.189 and 100, right? And I would say 192.168.189/200. Right, so this becomes my IP range boundary. Now remember, this configuration, the way I'm showing right now, is not recommended because it is kind of overlapping. Even my Active Directory site has got this IP address range. So what would happen if these two boundaries are assigned to different boundary groups, and then different management points are assigned to them for automatic site assignment. So this is purely not recommended. However, I'm only showing it for the demonstration and education purpose, so we understand how an IP address range based boundary can be created. Now there is another boundary type which is based on IP subnet. So again, if I create let me give it a name. I would say 192.168.189.0, and I would give it a subnet mask 255.255.255.0. It would automatically pick up a subnet ID. Let me click on OK. Right, so here it is my IP subnet based boundary. Again, this is completely not recommended because all three of them are kind of overlapping with each other, but this is only a demonstration. I'm going to delete this IP subnet and IP address range boundary, so it's alright for now. Let me create a boundary group now. So creating a boundary group is very simple. Go under boundary group, click on create boundary group, give it a name, ptc-pg for boundary group. Primary boundary group, if you want to give it a description. And this is where you need to add a server. Sorry, this is where you need to add all the boundaries. So let's say I'm choosing my AD site based boundary, which means this particular boundary which we created is now a member of this boundary group. If I go under reference, this is where I can add a server. Now currently I only have one site server, and that's what's prompting me here. So I add this one, and then I can tick a box which says use this boundary group for site assignment. So how does it work? Like if any client is part of this particular boundary, and it's determined either based on its Active Directory site or IP range, SCCM would straight away assign it the site based on the information in this boundary group. So that's it. I would uncheck it right now, and that is how I've created my first boundary and first boundary group. So now if I were to deploy an application management point would know exactly where that policy has to be sent, and distribution point would know exactly where the binaries of that application has to be sent and installed. In next videos, we'll learn a little bit about the discovery method. However, coming back to boundaries, now a little bit about sites and subnet based boundaries, like IP address and subnet based boundary. If you wanted to understand how we calculate a subnet, now this is going to be a little value add session as far as the context of SCCM administration is concerned, but let me show you actually how it's configured. So basically we all follow what's called an IPv4 IP address scheme. What it means is we have 4 octets of 8 bits each, and if I can demonstrate it this way, say 1 1 1 1 1 1. So yeah, so this becomes my one of the octet. If I can replicate this, right. So now I have got 32 bits together, 8, 8, 8, and 8. Now these 8 bits together, these 8 bits, they can have a value of either 1 or 0, and together they can have the maximum value of 255. So if I just merge this one, it becomes 255. Now how this is calculated is we convert the binary into the decimal format, and that's how we get the actual value. So like I said, every bit in this octet can have either a value of 0 or it can have a value of 1, and likewise the maximum value that the respective bits will have will be something like 1 2 4 8 16 32 64 and 128, and therefore the maximum value that an octet can have will be 255. Now, why I'm trying to show this is, although as an SCCM admin you need not have deep networking knowledge, but having a basic understanding of how subnets are calculated always helps an administrator wherever they are placed in IT industry. So again, if you cannot relate to what I'm trying to showcase right now, do not worry. But if you study a little bit, it'll be easier and very interesting topic to learn and understand. So usually this is how subnets are calculated. Let me say I want to have a subnet like 192.168.10.0 on subnet 24. So what this means is by giving it a /24, it means the first 24 bits are reserved, right? Like we cannot change the first 24 bits of this configuration. What we can do is we can only change the last 8 bits, right? In order to understand this subnet, let's first of all convert this decimal into binary format. So we will have 1 1, rest of them should be 0, and here it should be 1 0 1 0 1, and rest of them should be 0, sorry, 0. And since the third octet is 10, we will have it something like this, and then everything here should be a 0. So it's a very easy method to understand how IP subnetting works. Now we will only turn on the bits which says 1, and we will turn off the bits which says 0. So we will again do a sum. We get 192. Here we will leave this as turned on, and we will turn this off. We get 168. We get 10, and then this is the address schema base. This becomes the address scheming basically. It's 192.168.10.0 on a subnet which is 255, 255, 255, and 0, which means it can go from 255.255.255 to 0 till 255, 250, 255, 255, and 255. Right, and similarly, if I had to convert an IP address of, let's say, 192.168.10.10, right, then what I would do is I would convert these zeros and this to so we get 10. And now we could create an IP range based boundary starting from 192.168.10.0 to 192.168.10.10. Now, why IP range based boundaries are still relevant is because sometimes in some of the, like either remote office location, not necessarily every IP address or every subnet is part of a Active Directory site. So there are times when you need to rely upon only the IP address scheme, and so you need to create an IP address based boundary and attach it to a boundary group. Also, sometimes what happens is, in event of mergers, what happens is, although there is a trust relationship and the new domain has taken precedence, however, because the company which has merged is still having contract with the network provider, they follow a different IP addressing scheme. So maybe that the bigger company can have an address scheme like 10.8.10.0/16, something like that. Uh, However, the company that has merged with the bigger company will still be on 192.168 kind of a network, and that's why we tend to create an IP based or IP range based subnet. So if you did not follow the last part of this video on how to convert an address a binary into a desk, an IP address into a subnet based address, do not worry about it. Our main agenda for this course was to learn how to create a boundary group, how to create boundaries, how to create a boundary group, how to associate a boundary with a boundary group, and that I believe we have done successfully. Let me delete these overlapping boundaries so that I will only have an active directory site-based boundary in my environment, which I'm going to use in the following video for operating system deployment, policies deployment, application deployments, site assignments, etc. So thanks for watching again. Do tune in next time.